Thank you, Chris, for joining us today.
Pleasure, Tanya.
You're CEO of Mercy Care, a well-regarded not-for-profit organisation that mostly works with vulnerable clients. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that are unique to your environment?
We have a turnover of about 55 million, so we sit in the range of larger organisations in the not-for-profit sector, and we cover the four areas really of health, disability, aged care and general community services. And we have a staff complement of about 750 staff and about 150 volunteers. So it's a complex, diverse organisation, which means that we work across what we call the new world for not-for-profit organisations, which is a very challenging environment at the moment. For me, I think there's 5 areas that are impacting on the not-for-profit sector at the current time. One is the growing complexity of demand and need in the community, both in terms of the escalating demand but also the escalating complexity of that. We've got a strong move to marketisation of services. So we're moving funding and demand for services to the individual, and the whole purchase arrangement for individuals purchasing services from organisations. So we're being forced, in a sense, to enter into a market arrangement, the likes of which we haven't seen previously. Associated with that will be some changes in, certainly in government funding arrangements, where the funding will go to the client or the consumer, and then they will pick and choose the sorts of services that they want to access and from whom they'll access those services. So that has some significant implications for how we fund organisations moving forward. And we've got in that context the emergence of the whole social enterprise area, where we're looking at much more of a business focus and getting a return on investment than what we've had previously. I think the other important factor that's operating at the moment is the move to consolidation of the sector, resulting from some of those changes, particularly around government funding changes and government changes in policy. And that's really, there's a lot more talk now than what there ever was before about mergers and acquisitions and consolidation of the sectors and how organisations can collaborate and partner in a way that we haven't seen previously.
Okay.
And then I think the last area is the increasing complexity and the environment in which not-for-profits are required to operate. So we've got a lot more compliance, despite the promises of government to reduce regulation and red tape on this sector. I think the not-for-profit sector's just the regulation and compliance requirements are increasing by the day, certainly greater than what I've ever experienced in 40 years in this industry.
Chris, thank you very much for that significant insight into your sector. And it's clear that from that there's a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and certainly ambiguity around this newer environment, particularly looking at consumer-driven demand for services, for purchasing services. So tell me then, as a member of CEOs for Gender Equity, why gender equity, in spite of all of these challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis?
The bottom line for me as a CEO is that this is the right thing to do. To be focused on diversity right across our organisation, in particular gender equity and pay equity for this sector. I co-chair an organisation called Community Employers Western Australia that was set up back in about 2008 to address 3 key things, one of which was to achieve fair and just wages for staff that work in the not-for-profit sector. And we've certainly had some success with that with the current government. They injected over 600 million into the sector when they first came into government, and that's made a huge impact on the ability of the organisations to be able to address what was quite a significant pay gap between, for example, a Year 1 social worker working in this sector versus a Year 1 social worker working in the public sector. The gap in salary was almost 30% gap. So it's very significant. So the funding injection enabled us to reduce that gap somewhat. But I think it reflects the fact that over 80% of our workforce are women. I think the low wages in the sector, there is a direct correlation, I think, between the low wages and the fact that the majority of this sector are women. And I think we've got to make that connection when you look at actually what's happening in this state, where we've got, I think it's a pay gap of about 26%.
26%.
Versus 18% in the other states. We've obviously got some significant issues here. So for me, it's about really looking at what our practices are as organisations on the ground, what our policies are, and getting that front of mind. So for me, it's about an awareness of and a commitment to gender equity and pay equity issues as part of what we need to be doing to provide fairer and more just wages and conditions for our staff.
We know also that the majority of your trustees are female, the majority of your board is female. So tell us where some other equity gaps may be.
Look, I think at our governance level, if I start at the governance level within Mercy Care, we've worked hard to get that gender balance better. And we're certainly very pleased with where that is at the present time. We've also got significant gender balance at the middle manager level. Where we haven't got it at the moment is at the executive level, both in terms of we have more males than females at the executive level, and importantly, we don't have diversity in terms of age. The majority of us are close to retirement. So there's some issues and challenges at our executive level that we're working on at the moment. I think it was really quite interesting. I went to a luncheon with Elizabeth Broderick recently, and I actually talked about our situation. And her response was, the critical thing is to realise that we arrive in the sorts of situations that Mercy Care finds itself with its executive unintentionally. The commitment that we have now is to set some clear targets and to work towards, in an intentional way, getting that balance better than what we currently have it. And that's what we've done at a governance level, is to try and make sure that we've got the gender balance at that level. So that's the challenge for us at the moment. So we're doing a number of things with middle managers in terms of putting in place all sorts of policies that enable people to have more flexible work conditions, hours that they work, where they can work, etc. are really important initiatives that we've got underway at the moment. We've got some training in leadership, both internally, but we're involved in external activities like the Engaging Young Leaders in Governance course, which we sponsor and support, and we've had 2 of our middle managers participate in that program this year. So again, very intentionally, we're looking at ways that we can create the opportunities at the executive level.
So for you, it's about creating pathways to leadership, and
Totally.
it's about improving the capacity of the current staff, if you like, their competitiveness.
Yes, I think we do quite a good job at that level. We, as an organisation, and we need to. I think, just given the nature of the industry that we're often dealing with families that have life challenges, and that's reflected in our own workforce as well. So it's about how do we find the work-life balance, private life balance in all of that.
So we know that right now you're in the middle of reporting to the Workplace Gender Equity Agency.
Yes, I read that report the other day and signed off on it.
Oh, okay. So what's changed 12 months on?
I think for us, it's much more front of mind in terms of gender issues and getting the gender balance right. In the last 12 months, for example, we've brought down a succession planning program. So both for my role as CEO, but also for other executive roles, and also for key leadership positions in the organisation, including the chair of the board. So again, some very deliberate actions that we've taken, that we've been able to report on this year. We've got a much stronger representation of women at the governance level than what we've ever had previously, and that's been a great step forward.
Well, Chris, I'm absolutely delighted that you've been able to share some of your journey with us today, and we're trusting that your story will serve to influence and inspire other CEOs. So thank you very much.
Hopefully. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Eagles or Dockers?
Neither. Rugby.
Beach or bush?
Beach.
Ocean or river?
Ocean.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs, definitely.
Early bird, night owl?
Very early bird.
Golf or lycra?
Golf.
Sons or daughters?
Neither.